Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 8 important articles for a comprehensive and detailed analysis. Now before I start, let me wish all the UPSC aspirants who are appearing for tomorrow's prelims exam all the very best. You guys have been preparing for several months and years. So all the hard work is done. So now is the time to relax, stay calm. Today, you need not read or study anything or revise anything. There's no point in panicking in the last minute. Just stay calm, take enough rest, sleep properly tonight, and tomorrow go and ace this exam. So let's wish all these aspirants all the very best and we'll get started. But if you want the PDF of this session, please scan the QR code on your screen and join my Telegram channel because after the session ends, I'll be sharing the PDF over here. So let's begin the discussion and let's look at the first topic. In today's newspaper, there are plenty of articles related to Naxalism. In fact, recently we had discussed about a major operation which has been underway since few weeks, during which the top leader of the CPI Maoist, Basavaraju, was eliminated by India's security forces. Following this, India has stepped up this ongoing fight against Naxalism, and we have some big developments in the last couple of days, especially in Gachiroli in Maharashtra. Four top Maoists who were wanted by the security forces, they carried a reward of several lakh rupees on their heads. These four Maoists, who were also part of the top leadership, have been eliminated in Gachiroli by the C-60 Commandos, which is a specialist anti-Naxal force of the Maharashtra State Police. In a parallel development, in the Sukma district of Chhattisgarh, another top Naxal leader has been eliminated by the Cobra Special Force Unit of the CRPF. And in Chhattisgarh, more than 20 Naxals have surrendered. A very important battalion of the PLGA, the People's Liberation Guerrilla Army, which is the military wing of the CPI Maoist, which is the armed wing of the CPI Maoist. A key battalion of the PLGA has surrendered. The whole unit, with its deputy commander, they have surrendered in front of the security forces. These back-to-back developments, they have dealt a death knell to Naxalism and the Maoist movement in the country. Many experts believe that Naxalism is on the brink of going extinct. Government of India has a stated goal of ending Naxalism by March 2026. Union Home Minister Amit Shah has repeatedly spoken about this ambitious target to eliminate in one of India's longest lasting insurgencies. And as of now, India is on the brink of achieving this historic goal. And in a few months, if India continues with these operations, if we manage to eliminate the top leadership, arrest some of them, push them to surrender, push them towards talks, there is a possibility that Naxalism might eventually be wiped out, hopefully by next year. So that is the context. So this sweeping operation, which the central government has been running in coordination with the affected states, it has been codenamed as Operation Kagar. It's also being referred to as Operation Black Forest. It's essentially a reference to the Dandakaranya region, which has been the hotspot of Naxalism over the last few decades. Since the operations have primarily focused on the tribal forested belt of Chhattisgarh, Odisha, and Maharashtra, which is where the Dandakaranya region is located, the operation has been codenamed as Operation Black Forest. It's also being referred to as Operation Kagar. So while you might have heard everything about Operation Sindoor, while Indian media has obsessed with Operation Sindoor, there was something equally phenomenal that was happening in parallel, which the media has largely ignored and neglected. So let's shed some light on this critical development. I would not only look at the articles from the Hindu, I will expand the discussion by looking at some articles from the Indian Express as well. So if India manages to achieve this goal, trust me, this would be one of the biggest ever developments as far as India's security would be concerned. So, in this topic, what we need to understand is the brief history of Naxalism. What is Naxalism? Why did it start? How did the movement spread? And what is the current status? What has been India's approach to fight Naxalism? These are 4 to 5 important points that we need to learn in today's session. So let's start with Naxalism. Naxalism is a type of Maoist movement influenced by the Maoist ideology. So Maoism in India is referred to as Naxalism. And what is Maoism? Maoism is a type of left wing extremist communist ideology. It has its roots in communist China, inspired by the Chinese Civil War of the 1930s, 1940s, when the Communist Party of China rebelled against the then Chinese government, the Republic of China, under the leadership of Mao Zedong or Mao Zedong. So the communist leader in China, who was the general secretary at that point of the Communist Party in China, inspired this mass rebellion. He brought the masses together, farmers, peasants, workers who were oppressed, neglected by the Republic of China, by the government. They were brought together by Mao Zedong, and the Communist Party led the civil war, and eventually they toppled the Republic of China from power. They pushed the Kuomintang Party, the KMT, and its leader, Chiang Kai shek, to Taiwan, and mainland China was fully captured by the Communist Party under the leadership of Mao Zedong. This rebellion, mass rebellion, which was a protracted conflict, it was entirely based on the principles, the doctrine that was laid down by Mao Zedong. So, this essentially became the Maoist philosophy or the Maoist doctrine, a type of communist ideology, but it is essentially a left wing extremist ideology. Now, if you study Maoism in detail, if you look at the goals, the objectives, the tactics, Mao Zedong goes into the details of this. Mao Zedong basically advocated the complete capture of state power through an armed rebellion. Essentially, in Maoism, there is no scope for negotiations or talks. There is no scope for democratic methods of addressing the perceived injustices that might have happened to the masses. Mao Zedong essentially capitalized on the resentment that the masses held against government oppression, injustice, and government neglect. He capitalized on that, used the resentment to turn that into disaffection towards the government and to instigate a mass rebellion, urging the people to take up arms. So, taking up arms is non negotiable in Maoism. So, inherently, Maoism is a violent ideology, it's an extremist violent ideology. So, in a modern civilized world, that too in a democratic state like India, there is no space for such extremist violent ideologies. No matter what is the resentment or what is the grievance, you have democratic methods of expressing that through political methods, through protests, through the media, right? There are plenty of opportunities in a civilized democratic state to raise your grievances, to ensure your voice is heard, and to ensure justice is secured for those who have been oppressed. So, taking up armed violence with the aim of capturing state power and toppling the government, this extremist violent ideology has no space in a country like India. So, eventually in China, the CPC under Mao Zedong won the civil war. As I said, they toppled the Kuomintang party from power, and that's how the PRC was born, the People's Republic of China. In fact, that even explains why today's China is so aggressive. The aggressiveness of China and its inclination towards violent ideology stems from its very origin, which is rooted in Maoism and Maoist philosophy. So, this philosophy, the doctrine, would inspire similar rebellions in many countries around the world, including in India. Mao Zedong urged farmers, peasants, the landless, workers, and as well as the indigenous communities, which would be tribals in the context of India. He urged these masses to essentially stand with the Maoists, to not believe in the constitutional democratic processes, and take up arms against the state to throw the state out of power and capture the state power for themselves. So, this is clearly an insurgent movement which later took root in India in 1967. Now, if you look at Maoist philosophy, Mao Zedong advocated that the Maoists they should be prepared for a prolonged conflict, a protracted war, because Mao Zedong understood that the state cannot be easily toppled. Even though there is a mass armed rebellion, the state would any day be powerful. It would bring the might to the security forces to tackle the extremist threat. So Mao Zedong advocated that the Maoists have to be patient. They have to be prepared for a prolonged war. Even if they suffer a setback, they have to take a step back, regroup, revive, and come back stronger. So clearly, there is a territorial aim to capture territory, to capture government power. So this essentially makes it an insurgent movement, a classic insurgency. So in India, this philosophy found some appeal amongst communist extremists in India. And in 1967, in the Naxalbari village, that is where we witnessed the first breakout of Maoist violence in the country. That's why Maoism in India is called as Naxalism. It's named after the Naxalbari village in West Bengal. Naxalbari is located near the Siliguri corridor. So in West Bengal, in the feudal society that existed post independence, there was a lot of resentment against landlords, especially the farmers, the landless peasants and workers who had been oppressed and abused for centuries by these landlords, usually from the upper caste. They saw that they were in collusion with politicians and the police. The land reforms that were initiated, it never benefited the landless farmers and the peasants. So this grievance which was present turned into resentment. And Naxal leaders who had founded the movement in India would utilize this to brainwash the farmers and peasants and to lead an armed rebellion aimed at targeting the landlords and the state. The first breakout of violence took place in Naxalbari in West Bengal in 1967, setting off this deadly extremist movement in the country. Very quickly, the ideology would spread across remote rural parts of India, across the forested tribal belt of India. So, one by one, states like Bihar, later, which is today's Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, even parts of Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and even some parts of Punjab, Haryana, Delhi, NCR. All these regions would eventually come under the influence of Naxalism. More than 10 states would be severely affected. So from 1970s to early 2000, let's say till 2004, there were two distinct branches of Naxalism in the country, two separate outfits. One was the Maoist Communist Center of India, MCCI, which was operating in the Bihar West Bengal belt. This was one hotspot of Naxalism, which includes today's Jharkhand and the areas around it. So, Bihar West Bengal belt would emerge as one of the critical hotspots where a Maoist group known as the MCCI was very, very active, the Maoist Communist Center of India. Parallelly, there was another branch of Maoism led by the PWG, the People's War Group, which was active around the Andhra Pradesh, the United Andhra Pradesh belt, also across the borders of Maharashtra and Odisha. So this includes today's Chhattisgarh as well, today's Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. So this would become the second major hotspot where the PWG, the People's War Group, would lead the Naxal activities. So in the Bihar West Bengal belt, the primary grievance was land related issues, development related issues, the excessive corruption in the government, the injustice which was being done to farmers, peasants, and workers. Whereas towards Chhattisgarh, Andhra Pradesh belt, it was primarily tribal issues, the diversion of forest land, the eviction of tribal communities because of environmental laws, the displacement that was caused, the compensation which was not paid to them, the impact on traditional tribal rights. All these issues would play a role in influencing the masses and generating that large scale local support to instigate the Naxal movement. So throughout this period, for more than 30 years, from 1970s to early 2000, both MCCI and PWG were a significant security threat. There were other smaller splinter factions as well operating across India, apart from these two. But India managed to weaken these outfits primarily through security operations. Because initially, India perceived this as primarily a security problem. We never understood the root causes. We did not acknowledge some of the genuine root causes that existed. See, we may not agree with Naxal ideology, but the grievances of the masses is something that was genuine. The poor administration, the failure of governance, the injustice and the oppression that several communities suffered, the lower castes, tribal communities, farmers, peasants, and workers. Their grievances were absolutely genuine. The Naxals were capitalizing on it. They were essentially using that opportunity to brainwash the people. So the Indian state initially approached this problem as purely a security problem from the prism of security only. We used security forces to try and decimate these organizations. We managed to weaken these outfits as well. In fact, by early 2000, PWG had been considerably weakened, especially thanks to Andhra Pradesh police and its special force unit known as the Greyhounds. They registered tremendous success in weakening the PWG in the Andhra Odisha belt around the Dandakaranya region. Similarly, MCCI was significantly weakened in the Bihar, West Bengal, Jharkhand belt. Also, India's economic reforms post 91, the opening up of economic opportunities, the migration that happened from the hinterland towards India's cities. It eventually led to decline of support, and these groups were almost on the brink of extinction. Very similar to today. In early 2000, Naxalism was on the brink of defeat. But, as I said, Mao Zedong always advocated the Naxals, the Maoists, to be prepared for a protracted conflict. That is, even if they suffer setbacks, right, they will always take a step back. They will revive themselves. They'll regroup. They'll try to make a resurgence and come back again stronger. And we have seen that happen once. In the year 2004, one of the biggest developments took place in India's internal security. The MCCI and PWG, which had been decimated and weakened by Indian security forces, they decided to merge together. They came together to establish the CPI Maoist, which is today the primary Naxal outfit in the country. That is how CPI Maoist was born. Today, the CPI Maoist is a designated unlawful organization, which means it's a proscribed terrorist organization under the UAPA, under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. So, post 2004, we saw a big revival in Naxal activity, especially from 2008 onwards. We saw some massive attacks by Naxals in 2009, 2010 in the Chhattisgarh Odisha belt. But this time, their base had slightly shifted. Since Naxalism had been weakened in Bihar, West Bengal region, and also in Andhra Pradesh, Telangana region, in early 2000, CPI Maoist found a new hotbed in the Chhattisgarh Odisha belt. Look at the map here. A new hotspot emerged over here in the Chhattisgarh Odisha belt. So, in places like Bijapur, Dantewad, Sukma, Malkangiri, Gadchiroli in Maharashtra, these areas, these districts would become the new hotspots. And in the last 15 to 20 years, this is where the Naxal leadership has been hiding, operating, and launching these ambush attacks. Because Naxals primarily employ guerrilla tactics. They are masters in jungle warfare. They're also quite well funded, well armed. They raise finances primarily through extortion, through involvement in organized crime, such as drug trafficking, and as well as through some donations from sympathizers. This has been the primary mode of financing for Naxal operations. They manage to procure weapons. Either they target the armories of the police and security forces and loot weapons from security forces itself. Or they even have links with transnational groups. Back in 80s and 90s, Naxals in India had links with the LTT in Sri Lanka. They had links with Northeast insurgent outfits. They had links with the Maoists in Nepal. And reportedly, there were some links as well with Pakistan's ISI. So Through global arms trafficking networks, they would manage to procure advanced weapons, communication kits, etc. They would also procure local country made guns. Across UP, Bihar, there are several illegal gun making factories that produce these country guns, which are used by local gangsters and criminals. So Naxals would procure these local country guns as well, apart from stealing from security forces and procuring advanced weapons from the arms traffickers. So in that regard, Naxals were quite well equipped, well organized. In fact, if you look at Naxalism and these outfits, they have a proper organizational structure. A clear hierarchy exists because tomorrow they would like to form the state. They would like to replicate the state machinery. So in the Communist Party, if you look at the structure, there is a central committee which takes all the key political decisions in a way similar to, let's say, the cabinet in the government of India. So the central committee comprises of the top leaders, which is headed by the general secretary. And the general secretary is the so-called authoritarian supreme leader. That's the case in China as well. If you look at China, the PRC, there is a central committee, which is the highest political decision-making body in China. There is a Politburo, right? And the general secretary sits at the top. The general secretary automatically becomes the premier, which is essentially Xi Jinping in China as of now. So in India, as far as the Naxal movement is concerned, the current general secretary was Basavaraju, who was recently eliminated by Indian security forces, marking a huge win for India's fight against Naxalism. They have a separate intelligence branch to collect intelligence. They have a separate unit which looks after finances, a separate unit which looks after indoctrination, radicalization, recruitment, separate wing for training, and a separate military wing, the PLGA, the People's Liberation Guerrilla Army, which carries out these attacks against the security forces. So their main target has always been the state, security forces, police, the state establishment, government buildings and infrastructure, even elections. This has been the primary target of Naxals. So now we are at a pivotal point as far as our fight against Naxalism is concerned. As I said, in the last 2 years, the government of India with the state governments has really stepped up these operations. These are intelligence based operations. The government of India had designated CRPF as the primary anti Naxal force. The Manmohan Singh government stepped up the fight against Naxalism back in 2009 when PM Manmohan Singh declared left wing extremism as India's biggest internal security threat. So then India had launched Operation Green Hunt. It was never officially acknowledged by the government, but it was referred to as Operation Green Hunt by the media, by experts, which was a sweeping operation across Naxal affected states. Because there was a point when nearly 30% of India's geographical area was under some sort of Naxal influence. There were a few hotspots, at least 40 to 50 hotspots, where Naxals had managed to replace the administration or at least limit the presence of the administration. They would call them so called liberated zones. So more than 180 districts in the country at one point was affected. More than 12 to 14 states were affected. But today, India has seen tremendous success thanks to the efforts of the security forces and the agencies in the government over the last 2 decades. So it's not an overnight success for India. Because see, finally, India started acknowledging post 2005 that Naxalism is a deep rooted problem. It's not just a security problem, it's also an administrative problem. Starting with Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, then with Prime Minister Modi. The government of India started acknowledging the governance related factors which were responsible for the rise of Naxalism in the country. Several special schemes and initiatives were launched focused on Naxal affected areas to improve administration and governance. For example, we had the Integrated Action Plan that was implemented from 2010 to 2012 with special funding for these Naxal affected districts to provide for better amenities, better infrastructure, better roads were built, better electricity connection was given, jobs were created, farmers were supported, tribal welfare was a priority focus for the government. Several tribal welfare schemes were launched. So, with focus on administration, the governance related issues were addressed one by one. Parallelly, intense security operations were launched, intelligence based security operations under the leadership of CRPF in coordination with the state police. Because see, eventually this is an internal security matter. It's a law and order problem which comes under the state. So state police have the primary jurisdiction to fight Naxalism. But states are not well equipped. They may not have the right weapons, the right training. So that's where the central government comes in, provides additional troops in the form of CRPF and other central armed police forces. The center has also provided a lot of resources. It has special schemes in place, such as the security related expenditure scheme, through which the government of India has been reimbursing the Naxal affected states if they invest in police modernization. So several states followed the model of Andhra Pradesh police. Andhra Pradesh police became one of the first police forces in the country to raise a special force unit called the Greyhounds. It was a specialist force that specialized in guerrilla warfare, in jungle warfare tactics. So the same model was followed later by Odisha, Jharkhand, Maharashtra as well, the C60 Commando Unit of Maharashtra Police. They have their own anti-Naxal forces today. So they would be supplemented by the CRPF and central forces with additional funding and resources and intelligence support. The Intelligence Bureau and other agencies like NTRO, they would bring in advanced assets, including drones and satellites, into this war, providing better technology, better intelligence, GPS guided navigation kits, better body armor, better tactics to deal with IED bombs which are deployed, better tactics to deal with ambush attacks. Indian Army would train the security forces that were involved. Indian Air Force would provide aerial support for deployment and evacuation. So, with this combined effort, over the last 15 to 20 years, India has managed to substantially weaken Naxal influence in the country. And especially the last 2 years is very, very significant. Last year, more than 150 Naxals, especially the top leaders, were killed and eliminated. This year alone, in the last 6 months, more than 100 top Naxals have been eliminated, including its General Secretary, Basavaraj. So, in the last 2 days, there have been bigger developments. Top four Maoists who were wanted, they have been killed in Gachiroli. Another top Naxal leader in Sukma has been eliminated, and more than 20 Naxals have surrendered from a very important battalion of the PLGA. That's why experts, they are essentially arguing that maybe we are witnessing the death of Naxalism, the complete end of this extremist movement. Today, the Naxal affected states and districts, they have gone down considerably. According to Ministry of Home Affairs, as per latest data, less than 30 districts have some kind of Naxal presence and Naxal activity. This number was as high as 126 in 2018. For 2018, more than 126 districts were affected. In early 2000, 180 plus districts were affected. So look at the progress India has seen over the last 20 years. The economic growth, better administration and governance, and improved effective security operations, in combination, has reduced the appeal for the youth to join the Naxal movement. Their recruitment has gone down substantially. Their presence has been essentially eliminated by the forces. And by 2018, just around 90 districts were under the influence. We had managed to bring it down by half. It came down to around 70 in 2021. And last year, it was just around 38 districts, which had some kind of Naxal presence and activity. So, this also is primarily centered in central eastern India, in Gachiroli district in Maharashtra, Bijapur, Sukma, Narayanpur in Chhattisgarh, Malkangiri, Dantewad towards the Odisha region, and Andhra Pradesh Telangana border. Some activity has been seen in Kerala as well, but they don't have operational presence. They just have used the Western Ghats in Kerala and Karnataka, Tamil Nadu as a hideout. They've tried to spread the ideology, but they've never got local support. And they don't have any operational presence. They've never been able to carry out big attacks in southern India. So Central Eastern India remains the last remaining, the holdout. This is the last holdout of the Naxals, and India is almost wiping them out. Now the big question: should India focus on eliminating the Naxals altogether through these encounters? Should the focus be on killing the top leadership, or should we open them for talks as well? This is the big question, because critics are pointing out that such a harsh approach eventually could create further resentment, as it could lead to large scale human right violations as well. This has been a persistent problem for India in any conflict zone or in any insurgency hit zone. Yes, it is essential to take out those extremists who are not willing to talk. For example, those Naxal leaders who basically formed their opinions in the 70s and 60s, the hardcore Naxal extremists, they would never change their views. You take Basavaraju, for example. His grooming happened in the 1970s as a young college student. His ideology was so rooted in violence that he would never give it up. In fact, he headed the military wing. It was under his leadership that the deadly 2010 attack was carried out against CRPF, where 76 CRPF Jawans were martyred. Obviously, such extremists can't be consulted. I mean, you can't talk to them, you can't bring them under the negotiation process. Though India has reached out several times, urging Naxals to talk and surrender and enter the mainstream political process, these hardline leaders had never agreed. They always kept on insisting on the military path, on the path of war. So it is essential, I mean, it is inevitable that such encounters will take place when you're dealing with these hardcore extremists who are never willing to change, who are not willing to accept the ground reality. But there are several others in the middle and lower ranks who are not so interested in the ideology, who want to break away from this movement, right? They will take up the offer to surrender and engage in talks and enter the mainstream. So this is where the government should adopt a more balanced approach. Instead of just a harsh security approach focused on encounters, there should be an option where Naxals should be allowed to surrender. In fact, states have the policy. There is a surrender policy in place. But right now, this has not been given a priority as the government has set a target of March 2026 to eliminate Naxalism. So while it is necessary to use force against hardcore extremists who are not willing to surrender, who are still committed to the path of violence, they need to be met with force. There's no option, there's no doubt about it. But don't forget, this is a very strong rooted ideological movement. Can't defeat ideological movements without addressing the root causes. One of the root cause has been that locals in Naxal hit areas have been targeted by security forces as well. There are large scale allegations of human right violations, especially when attacks would happen. It's been reported that security forces who would be angry at the losses, they would often target local villages, resulting in custodial deaths, torture, kidnappings, and human right violations. Now, if you end up doing that, security forces will create a bad image for themselves. This will destroy the trust. You cannot win such a war without local support. In any such conflict, whether government forces will win the conflict or extremists will win the conflict will be determined by local support. Whose side will local support be on? Naxalism could thrive for so many decades because there was an element of local support, because the local people had grievances, resentment, which was never addressed. Now that we are addressing those grievances, now that administration has improved, governance has become better, now is the time to win the hearts and minds of the locals as well. And this requires a balanced approach. You can't use brute force all the time. If someone is willing to surrender, if someone is willing to talk, right, the option should be available. And ensure that innocents are not targeted. Civilians should not become collateral damage. Because there have been few disturbing incidents in the last 2 years. As we stepped up the anti-Naxal operations, few innocent tribal civilians have been killed as well. Tribal youth have been targeted. So this will create even more resentment, even more hatred against the government, and it will further drive the recruitment for Naxals. That is something we need to avoid very cautiously. Avoid human right violations at any cost. Avoid brute force at any cost. Use proportionate force that is needed only to target the hardcore extremists who are not ready to surrender and talk. If there are others who are ready to surrender, the option should be available. We have seen that yesterday. More than 20 top Naxals from this important battalion of PLGA have surrendered. They have laid down their arms, and essentially the security forces have taken them into custody. That is the option which should be used by and large. And using force should be just a last resort, only reserved for those extremists who are not willing to surrender. So let me know what you think about this. This is a pivotal moment in India's security history. That's why the topic is very important, and I've taken so much time to explain this in complete detail. Please take up this practice question. Let me know your views on this in the comment section below. If you want me to cover Naxalism in a detailed video, a separate video, please let me know in the comments. Given the developments, the huge developments that are taking place, right? If you want a separate video on this, please let me know. And if there is enough people backing and supporting that, I would record a separate video on this, covering all the details, the entire history, the background, and the tactical details as well with regard to our fight against Naxalism. Now let's move on to the next article. This is also related to internal security. It's related to CAPFs, the Central Armed Police Forces. First, let's quickly understand what are CAPFs, what is their role, and then we'll talk about the article. Central Armed Police Forces are essentially the paramilitary forces of the government, of the central government. See, when it comes to security, there are three distinct types of security forces. One, you have your armed forces, which includes your army, navy, air force, etc. They are responsible for dealing with external threats primarily, to fight India's wars, to defend India's territorial integrity and sovereignty, to fight the external enemy. So they are very well armed, very well equipped. They receive superior training and they are trained to kill. So armed forces bring a lot of lethality with them. They are very lethal. They're trained to be lethal because they're meant to deal with a lethal enemy, usually a external enemy. On the other extreme, you have your police forces, your law enforcement agency at the state and central level. Usually, police forces on the ground, they don't employ lethal force, right? Using lethal force is a last resort for the police. They always try to solve crimes, investigate any criminal offenses, and if there is a law and order situation, let's say there is a riot happening, they try to use non-lethal methods to control the mob, to control the riots. They use rubber bullets. They might use pellet guns or water cannons or pepper spray or tear gas. But using an actual weapon is only a last resort for the police. They are trained to be more sensitive. They are trained to be more empathetic towards the civilian population. And using force is only a last resort as a self-defense measure, right? So that is the other extreme. So armed forces who are extremely lethal, police who are extremely sensitized and use lethal options only as a last resort. But sometimes to deal with internal conflicts and large scale security situations, you need a mix of both. You need the lethality, the training, the equipments of the armed forces, but you also need the sensitivity, the empathy of the police, using minimal force like the police do. So that is where paramilitary forces come in. The paramilitary is often a mix of your armed forces and police forces in terms of equipment, in terms of weapons they have, in terms of their training, in terms of their recruitment, and also with regard to their overall mandate. So India has seven important paramilitary forces. They are officially known as CAPFs, Central Armed Police Forces. Just like state governments have state police, because policing is a state subject, according to 7th schedule of the Indian Constitution. Similarly, central government has its own set of police forces, the Central Armed Police Forces, CAPFs, which are nothing but the paramilitary forces of India. Some of these paramilitary forces are border guarding forces. Their primary duty is to guard and secure India's international borders under the One Border, One Force policy, which was implemented after the Kargil War. Prior to Kargil, each international border was guarded by multiple security forces, leading to confusion, overlapping jurisdiction, and lack of coordination as well. Kargil War exposed the weakness in India's security mechanisms. The government of India had set up a committee, the Kargil Review Committee, under Dr. K. Subramaniam, the father of Dr. S. Jaishankar. The Kargil Review Committee gave a number of recommendations to reform India's security architecture. And one recommendation regarding border management, border security, was implementation of One Border, One Force policy. Meaning one security force would be entirely responsible for guarding one entire stretch of the border. So India-Pakistan border is guarded only by the BSF. India-Bangladesh border is also guarded just by the BSF. There are no other forces present. India's borders with Nepal guarded by the SSB, the Sashastra Seema Bal. SSB also guards India's borders with Bhutan. So one border, one force. One entire international border guarded by one security force. BSF guarding the borders with Pakistan and Bangladesh. Then you have ITBP, Indo-Tibetan Border Police, guarding the borders with China. Then Assam Rifles. See, many students often they confuse Assam Rifles to be a unit of the Indian Army. It's not. Please clarify. I'm clarifying this for you. Assam Rifles is under the Home Ministry. It's a paramilitary force. It's a CAPF. It's not part of the Indian Army. The confusion arises because to deal with insurgency in Northeast India, Assam Rifles has been placed under the operational command of the Indian Army. So Indian Army only has operational command on the ground, only where AFSPA has been implemented. So in that regard, it functions under Defense Ministry. That's why the confusion arises. But it doesn't belong to the Indian Army. It's not part of the Indian Army. Assam Rifles is a distinct CAPF guarding the borders with Myanmar and countering insurgency in the northeast along with the Indian Army. Then we have a specialist force called CISF, Central Industrial Security Force, providing security for critical infrastructure, be it airports, seaports, nuclear power plants, dams, important government buildings, and strategic installations, right? They're all guarded by the CISF, the Industrial Security Force. CRPF, Central Reserve Police Force, which is mainly mandated to deal with internal security. So it is deployed in Jammu and Kashmir as well in a counterinsurgency role to assist Indian Army in counterinsurgency operations. It is designated as the primary anti-Naxal force deployed in the Naxal corridor, and it can be mobilized for any other internal security reasons. Then finally, there is another elite CAPF, the NSG, National Security Guards, also called as the Black Cats, a elite counter-terrorist force of the Home Ministry. It specializes in anti-hijack, anti-hostage situations, and close quarters battle in a urban combat environment, mainly to deal with counter-terrorism. So these are the different roles of the CAPFs. Apart from this, they also perform few peacetime roles as well. They help in the conduct of elections. They provide security during elections. They come under the Election Commission of India, right? They also play a big role in disaster management. There are few battalions in each CAPF which are trained in disaster management. In fact, the National Disaster Response Force (NDRF) was created by drawing battalions from these CAPFs itself. So they give assistance in search and rescue operations. They can be considered as a second line of defense during times of war. If at all India is involved in a conflict, CAPFs essentially become the backup for the Indian armed forces. Right? We saw that during Operation Sindoor. The BSF became the second line of defense for the Indian Army. Right? So that is essentially the role and functions of CAPFs. Now, coming back to this article, what is this development? Why is it important? The Supreme Court has ruled that Group A officers of CAPFs should be recognized as organized services. Now, why is this important? See, in CAPFs, there is direct recruitment where the Jawans are directly recruited, officers are directly recruited, including Group A officers such as assistant commandants. Right? UPSC itself conducts the exam. I'm sure many of you are aware about the CAPF AC exam, the assistant commandant exam. But the problem is that Group A officers who join these services, their opportunity for promotion and career growth is very, very, very limited. Why? Because these CAPFs are dominated by IPS officers who come from the outside, who come on deputation. IPS officers who dominate the CAPFs, they end up occupying all the top positions, the critical positions, especially for the rank of IG, DIG. IPS officers who come on deputation, they come for a few years and work for the paramilitary force and then they leave the organization. They get better opportunities compared to the in-house cadre which is present. Now, this is extremely unfair to the Group A officers of the CAPFs, and there has been a long-standing demand to rectify this. In fact, an assistant commandant should get promoted to a commandant in 13 years, ideally. But in reality, it is taking 25 years. Basically, you're almost about to retire. Your career would be coming to an end. By the time you get promoted, you just get one promotion. Imagine throughout your career, from assistant commandant to commandant. Get that one promotion that takes your entire life, your entire career. This long delay is happening because IPS officers are coming from the outside on deputation and taking away these positions. At, let's say, the DIG level, 20% posts are going to IPS officers who come on deputation. At IG level, 50% posts are going to IPS officers. Sometimes it is more than that. In fact, a DIG was interviewed by the Hindu. The DIG has informed anonymously that it took him 31 years of service to become a DIG. Ideally, it should have been just 21 years. Whereas IPS officers will end up reaching these positions much quicker. That shows the domination of certain services like IPS when it comes to security agencies and forces of India. There has been a long-standing complaint that in-house cadre never gets priority. You find the same issue in our intelligence agencies as well, in IB and RAW, where the in-house cadre never get promotions, but IPS officers who are coming on deputation and going, they will not even have specialization. They don't even specialize in that domain. They come for a few years, work, and then they leave. And that shows the domination of the IPS over different security forces and agencies. So this is detrimental to the morale, to the motivation of our security forces. That's why addressing these issues has to be a priority in our internal security policy. The government never addressed it. The Supreme Court has stepped in. The Supreme Court has recognized the Group A officers of CAPS from 1986 batch onwards as organized services, which means now going forward, they will get priority. Supreme Court has clearly ordered the Home Ministry to reduce the deputation of IPS officers gradually in the next 2 years. It has set a deadline as well. In the next 2 years, progressively reduce IPS appointments, increase in-house appointments, give more opportunities to Group A officers in the CAPFs. This will not only increase their remuneration, their pensions, it will basically serve as a morale boost, a motivating factor. So this was a long-standing demand, and this is something the Supreme Court has now taken into its own hands. Next, take up this question related to what we have discussed. Addressing service-related issues of CAPF should be a priority in our internal security policy. See, this reminds me, Assam Rifles has been facing one major problem, an administrative problem from a long time. I just told you Assam Rifles comes under both Defense Ministry and Home Ministry. Home Ministry is the cadre controlling authority. It is a CAPF under Home Ministry, but operational command is with Army in the Northeast, and hence it comes under Defense Ministry. So as a result, the personnel of Assam Rifles have faced numerous problems, be it their transfers, their promotions, their pensions and salaries. Everything has been affected as two separate ministries are dealing with these matters. Home Ministry remains the cadre controlling authority, but operational command is exercised by the Army through the Defense Ministry. So this duality, the dual control over Assam Rifles, has affected the personnel of Assam Rifles who have served the nation bravely, sacrificing themselves. So this is a disservice. In fact, there is a case at the Supreme Court on this matter as well. The veterans from Assam Rifles and some of the serving personnel have approached the Supreme Court asking the government to end this dual control, place them under one ministry, either Home Ministry or Defense Ministry. Ideally, it should be Home Ministry because Assam Rifles is also a border guarding force, guarding India's borders with Myanmar. So please focus on this issue. How important is it to address service-related matters, administrative matters that affect our security forces? Let's look at the next article related to the Indian judiciary. Until now, we were talking about issues in the security forces. Now let's talk about issues in our judiciary. Supreme Court Judge A.K. Oka, who retired yesterday, has made some very important observations during his retirement speech, during his farewell. Justice A.K. Oka has delivered some key judgments during his term as a Supreme Court judge. His illustrious career has come to an end. During his farewell, he observed that the Supreme Court is the guardian of constitutional liberties. The Supreme Court is essentially the guardian of your fundamental rights, guardian of the Constitution itself. He has observed that Supreme Court judges are not bound by anything else apart from the Constitution, the law of the land, and their own conscience. Now, this is a very powerful statement made by the former Supreme Court judge who has just retired. He has clearly highlighted the critical role of the Supreme Court in upholding fundamental rights and constitutional liberties, in keeping the executive and legislature under check, ensuring that any unconstitutional action or unconstitutional laws are immediately squashed, protect your liberties and fundamental rights. But however, the former judge has raised one important issue, that Supreme Court is often dominated by the Chief Justice of India. He has observed that Supreme Court has become Chief Justice of India centric. Because if you look at all key judgments and decisions, or even media reports as well regarding Supreme Court hearings, it's primarily driven by what the CJI is doing, at what CJI is saying, whereas the other judges don't get the same kind of priority or coverage. So this actually brings up a very important issue within the Supreme Court. Now, if you look at the strength of the Supreme Court, what is the strength? It is 34 judges as of now. 33 Supreme Court judges plus the CJI, the Chief Justice of India. So current strength is 34. Now, how come the other 33 judges don't get the same priority or recognition or treatment as compared to the Chief Justice of India? See, obviously, the CJI is a vital position, a constitutional position. But if you look at the powers vested with them, the CJI is actually not superior to the other judges, right? If you think CJI is superior over other Supreme Court judges, that is largely a misconception. The CJI, as envisioned under the Constitution and the constitutional scheme of things, is just first amongst the equals. The CJI is just considered as the first amongst equals. So all Supreme Court judges are equal in terms of their authority, in terms of the powers they exercise. But CJI is considered as first amongst those equals because the CJI is also the master of the roster. Essentially, the CJI decides on the benches that are constituted which judge will head the bench. Should a constitutional bench be set up to hear matters related to the Constitution? And also the allotment of the cases. Which cases will be allotted to which bench headed by which judge? This is decided by the Chief Justice of India, which makes him or her the master of the roster. In that regard, the CJI becomes first amongst equals. But for every other matter, all the judges of the Supreme Court are essentially equals. Now, this excessive focus on the CJI stems from the fact that the CJI has administrative control of the court. Under the Supreme Court Rules 2013, CJI enjoys administrative control, which includes assignment of cases, right? That is where the CJI gets that additional power and authority. Now, if you look at, let's say, the judgments that have been passed by the Supreme Court, there have been historic verdicts delivered by other Supreme Court judges as well. But the rulings and the sayings of the Chief Justice of India gets more priority, more attention, right? And also, Justice A.K. Oka has pointed out the lack of transparency as well when it comes to allotment of cases, setting up of benches, etc. If the CJI decides this entirely, if the master of the roster decides this and it's a discretionary power, it could lead to a certain bias. There are cases where it appears that the Chief Justice of India constituted a certain bench just so that the judges would agree with his view or his opinion. Now, to avoid that, there is one solution, a very simple solution: automate the allotment of cases. There's no need for anyone to be the master of roster. We saw this during COVID-19 when the pandemic broke out and judicial functioning was interrupted. The allotment of cases was automated, it was digitized. Essentially, computers will allot the case, ensuring complete transparency and fairness. But if the CJI is the master of the roster, there is always that element of discretion, element possibility of bias. So that is exactly what A.K. Oka has highlighted. He has actually praised the recent chief justices for bringing some transparency because they are essentially looking at allotment of cases publicly in full public sight instead of holding that discussion in the office. So he has praised the initiative that Chief Justice of India currently and the previous CJI has initiated, but he has essentially called for greater equality amongst the judges of the Supreme Court. It is a fact that the CJI does have a disproportionate power, right? Mainly because of him being the master of the roster and having administrative control of the Supreme Court. So this can, anyways, as I said, the allotment of cases can be automated, and that would bring a level of equality amongst the judges. Now, looking at the next article, again related to internal security, there is a very, very important statement given by the CDS, the Chief of Defense Staff. We spoke about the CDS just yesterday, right? I've already explained the role of CDS as well. So I'll not repeat that, but we'll just focus on this article, what the CDS has said. The CDS has recently written a book on India's armed forces and the upcoming reforms. Now, please understand, apart from all the roles that we discussed yesterday, as far as the CDS is concerned, there is one pivotal role which has been assigned, a mandate which has been given to the Chief of Defense Staff. The mandate is to promote theaterization, to bring jointness, essentially to set up joint commands, theater-based commands. Creating integrated theater commands is one of the mandate of the CDS. See, around the world, if you look at the most powerful militaries, they are no longer organized as Army, Navy, Air Force distinctly. Though on an organizational level, the three services exist. With regard to operations, on an operational level, there is an integrated command which operates. If you look at US, you look at even Russia, China, United Kingdom, they've all integrated their operational commands, whereas the training and organizational commands are made separate. Now, this essentially, this integration that can happen between the armed forces, it will not only bring synergy and jointness in operations, make our operations, military operations more effective, it will even end up saving precious resources. Because sometimes there is an overlap of expenditure. Like Army also spends on air defense, Air Force also spends on air defense, Navy will also spend on air defense. Instead of that, how about we have an air defense command? Army, Navy, Air Force have their own logistics individually, which is honestly a waste of resource. How about having an integrated logistics command for all the armed forces? And how about bringing out theater based commands? Theater refers to a geographical region. Right now, Indian Army has a separate northern command focusing on Pakistan and China, separate western command, southwestern command, etc. How about integrating them? How about having a unified northern command that can deal with the threats from both Pakistan and China, including the threat from terrorism? A joint command comprising of Army, the Air Force, and the Navy. This will bring more efficiency, reduce wasteful expenditure. It will optimize the defense budget. So we do have such unified commands, such integrated commands that exist. Two of them are present as of now. One is the Andaman Nicobar Command. At Andaman Nicobar Islands, we have an integrated theater-based command where all three services are operating under one unified command. Then we have the SFC, Strategic Forces Command, which maintains control over India's nuclear arsenal, which is responsible for deploying India's nuclear weapons in a nuclear war. The SFC is also an integrated, a unified command comprising of all three services. But other than that, right now we have Army, Navy, Air Force as separate services, and that is what the CDS has spoken about. The CDS has proposed what will be the model that India might follow in the coming years. We might witness one of the biggest reforms ever as far as India's security is concerned. So, what the CDS has proposed in his book is that there would be two separate branches in the armed services. Not regular Army, Navy, Air Force, but there would be a force application service and a force generation service. Now, what do you mean by this? Force generation refers to raising of a force. You have to raise a army, a navy, a air force. You have to train them after you recruit them, correct? And you have to sustain them, meaning you have to keep them agile, keep them active, conduct exercises, pay them salaries, give them the required compensation. So all these matters come under force generation domain. Now this would remain with existing army, air force, and navy under the command of the respective service chiefs. The army chief, navy chief, air force chief who are present, right? They will continue to head these services. Their job is force generation. They will only create the force, create the armed force needed for the country. They will create army soldiers, air force pilots, etc., and naval commanders, etc. They will be a generating entity. They will recruit, train, sustain them. That would be one aspect of the military force generation, which is extremely critical, extremely important. This is where the training happens. Once the training is done, once they are deployed into forward positions, especially, then they will come under a different command altogether, force application command. Now, let's say there is a maritime threat that we are dealing with. Let's say piracy has become a major threat. To deal with piracy, it will not just be the Navy which will lead the fight against piracy. It would be an integrated maritime command comprising of Army, Navy, Air Force soldiers. Those who are trained here, they will be brought into these unified theater based commands. A single unified maritime command for India, comprising of all the assets, not just the soldiers, even the weapons, the military hardware, will be integrated. Similarly, a unified air defense command. Recently, we saw how India's air defense performed phenomenally during Operation Sindhu. But the assets that were deployed were separate for the Air Force and the Navy. How about we have an integrated air defense command, a unified command drawing from all three services? So, for operational matters, when force is being applied on the ground, right, there is no Army, Navy, Air Force. They will all unify into a single integrated theater based command. This is the big shift, the paradigm shift, which is going to happen in India's armed forces. It's going to take some time, but that is the job of the CDS. The CDS was created primarily for this purpose, to bring about theaterization, to set up joint commands, and create a distinction between recruitment and training and actual deployment in the battlefield. So here the command will be exercised by the operational commanders, not the service chiefs. Operational commanders will be essentially exercising the command here as far as force application is concerned, clearly drawing a distinction between force generation and force application. So, this is a huge shift that India is planning as far as defense reforms in the country is concerned. Please focus on this topic, and there will be a lot of developments in the coming days as well. Now, coming to the next topic, Prime Minister Modi has made a big statement. PM Modi was attending Rising Northeast Summit, investor summit to attract private investors to invest in the northeastern states of India. Not just the Seven Sisters, but including Sikkim as well. These eight northeastern states have been prioritized by the government, and PM Modi has not only urged for investments, but he has also said that Northeast India is no longer a frontier region. When we say frontier region, it refers to a faraway, remote border location. That has always been the perception of Northeast India. But PM Modi has said Northeast is no longer a frontier, it's a front runner in India's growth story, in India's development. He has stated that Northeast India will be a gateway for trade with Southeast Asia. This has been India's approach since 1991, since the Look East policy was launched by then Prime Minister PV Narasimha Rao. One of the key priorities of Look East policy was always to integrate Northeastern markets with Southeast Asian markets, to open up a gateway using Myanmar and link Northeast India with Southeast Asia so that Northeastern products can find export market in Southeast Asian countries. So that we can bring investments from Southeast Asian markets towards Northeast India to create jobs. This is the economic linkage that India has always envisioned under the Look East policy. It has been driven by subsequent governments as well through various initiatives, including connectivity projects to link Northeast India with Southeast Asia. You might have heard about Kaladan project, the multimodal transit transport corridor that India Myanmar have been working on. You would have heard about IMT trilateral highway, the India Myanmar Thailand trilateral highway project, which is an ongoing project. So India's ambition is to eventually link and connect the Northeast with Southeast Asia so that it will help in the economic transformation of the Northeast. It would also help in tackling the security problems in the Northeast. Now, this statement of the PM acquires a lot of significance in the backdrop of what Bangladeshi leader Mohammad Yunus had recently stated. The interim leader, the chief advisor of the interim government in Bangladesh, Mohammad Yunus, he had recently made a very controversial statement regarding Northeast India. When he was visiting China in Beijing, right, he basically stated that Northeast India is landlocked, which is the truth. Northeast India is a landlocked region. It has a disadvantage. There is a clear geographical disadvantage. But Mohammad Yunus said that Bangladesh is the only guardian of the sea. He was basically referring to Bay of Bengal and the ports present in Bangladesh, Chittagong and Mongla port. And he was inviting China to make use of Bangladeshi ports to access Bay of Bengal via Bangladesh, as it is the so-called guardian of the sea, to access India's northeast. Now, this statement is controversial because it appears as if he's inviting China to interfere and meddle with India's northeast. So this triggered a lot of concern in India. India retaliated as well. We ended the transshipment facilities for Bangladesh. We have recently shut cross-border trade through land ports, and Bangladesh also has retaliated by suspending some trade along the land border points. So clearly, tensions are rising between India and Bangladesh. And China is playing a bigger role. There are reports that Bangladesh has leased a strategic air base to China near the Siliguri corridor. It's being reported that China might be involved in the development of a Bangladeshi air base very close to India's Chicken's Neck. So, in this backdrop, India has taken some big decisions as well. We have recently announced a new connectivity link to connect with Northeast India without depending on Bangladesh. Because for many years, we saw Bangladesh as an alternate route to Northeast India. For the last 20 years, when we had a friendly leader like Sheikh Hasina and a friendly government in Bangladesh, we invested in joint connectivity projects, road and railway and inland navigation projects. So through mainland India, we can connect with Northeast India through Bangladesh. But now with Bangladesh turning hostile, the rise of anti-India forces and pro-Pakistan, pro-China forces, it's essential for India to diversify and come up with alternate plans. The government of India has recently announced that we are going to plan an alternate connectivity route without depending on Bangladesh. We will use maybe Myanmar. We will build infrastructure through Siliguri itself to connect with Northeast India so that we are not dependent on anyone. So, in this backdrop, for the PM to state that Northeast India is no longer the frontier, that Northeast India will develop and attracting investors to invest in this region, and stating that Northeast is a gateway to Southeast Asia, this is a very powerful symbolic statement. It is meant for Dhaka and Beijing. The message was basically delivered for Bangladesh and China that you can't mess with our neighborhood, right? So, under the Act East policy, the Modi government has stepped up India's engagement with Southeast Asia. We are not just looking eastwards, we are acting eastwards since 2014. In fact, in the last decade, it's been more than 10 years since Act East was implemented. In the last 10 years, more than 700 visits have been carried out by India's union ministers to Southeast Asia region. That tells you the focus that India has been paying to this region. In just 10 years, if you take the visit of union ministers collectively, more than 700 visits have taken place. So that shows the growing relations between India and Southeast Asian countries in the ASEAN region and even beyond towards East Asia. So Northeast India has been that priority for us. Even under Act East, Northeast region, developing Northeast, connecting it with Southeast East Asia has been a priority. For example, Japan, which is a focus country under the Act East policy, has become one of the big investors in Northeast India. Did you know Japan is already providing concessional loans to India, investing in infrastructure projects across the Northeast from Assam to Tripura? So many Japanese investors, banks were also participating in the Rising Northeast Summit. Foreign investors were part of it. Indian private capital industries were part of it. So this push from India is a clear message, a very distinct message from India that countries like Bangladesh cannot mess around with India's neighborhood, given the strategic interest that we have, right? So India is clearly opening up towards the region. But of course, one challenge remains, which is Myanmar. Given the civil war in Myanmar, current situation, it presents a lot of difficult challenges for us. Also, the fact that Myanmar has been under sanctions, Western economic sanctions, it has been blacklisted by FATF. This has ended up derailing Indian investments on projects like Kaladan and IMT Trilateral Highway. But the Prime Minister has reiterated that India will continue to strive to link Northeast India with Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. That is the end goal. Once we establish the IMT highway, there is a proposal between India and ASEAN to extend the trilateral highway all the way till Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. Basically, that will give us access to South China Sea. So, if China can meddle in India's backyard, so can India with such projects. If India can bring this region into direct connectivity with Northeast, we will end up directly accessing South China Sea. And we have fantastic relations with countries like Vietnam, both economic and defense relations. So that's the context in which you have to see this statement, which has been made by the Prime Minister. It's a very symbolic statement. Now, coming to the last part of today's class, let's quickly wrap up the discussion. Let's look at the prelim section. The Supreme Court has upheld the dual taxation on broadcasting services. The broadcasting in India is taxed by the central government as well and the state government as well. So there are dual taxes. The center is placing a service tax, the state government places an entertainment tax. So this has been a complaint from the broadcasting industry. So India's media networks, news channels, etc., they were very unhappy that they had to pay two taxes to the center and state, which was essentially hurting their profit margins. So in this related case, the Supreme Court has observed that these taxes by center and state, it is completely valid. It is legally, constitutionally valid as per the Finance Act of 1994. The taxes on broadcasting services was prescribed through Finance Act 1994 by the central government when the then budget was introduced and approved by the parliament. Now, what is the rationale here behind this ruling of the Supreme Court? Supreme Court has upheld the taxes. It has said this is not dual taxation. It's not like a double tax or a burden. This is a legitimate tax levied by two legislatures. At the central level, parliament is levying a service tax. At the state level, state legislatures are levying entertainment tax. And this is both valid. How? What is the rationale here? Broadcasting is essentially a service. It's a service-based industry. And on services, central government has the authority. It has the legislative mandate to levy a service tax according to entry number 97 of the Union List, which is provided under the 7th schedule of the Indian Constitution. The 7th schedule identifies the various subjects and categorizes them into union, state list, and concurrent list. So, union government and the parliament, they are well within their jurisdiction to levy a service tax on broadcasting. Now, if you look at broadcasting, it is also a type of entertainment, type of luxury. Correct? Because broadcasting not only involves information, media, news, it includes recreation as well, entertainment as well. So states have the jurisdiction under entry number 62, entry 62 of the state list, to categorize broadcasting as entertainment as a type of luxury and levy an entertainment tax on broadcasting services. Both are legally valid. That's what the Supreme Court has said. So this will make a number of broadcasters in the country unhappy. Number of news anchors will be very unhappy. But as the Supreme Court has pointed out, this is perfectly valid as the center and state are applying these taxes well within their jurisdiction. Now, coming to the next topic. On page 10, we have an article related to the Inspire Fellowship. See, the article itself is not very important, but you should know what is the Inspire Fellowship. So first, let's know the context. Why is it in news? Inspire Fellowship is an initiative driven by the Department of Science and Technology to attract talented researchers, to give a boost to India's scientific research and development, to attract the country's youth, to ensure the youth do not end up going abroad or join private organizations, and to keep them within the field of public research and development. The government of India launched this ambitious program called Inspire Fellowship Program. The idea was to basically provide internships and research offers at our leading research centers and pay them a decent stipend, pay them a reasonable amount of money per month so that their financial needs are taken care of and they can parallelly serve India's national interests. They can also parallelly focus on their higher studies as well. That was the whole goal of Inspire Fellowship. But what is really concerning is that for the last 13 to 15 months, these fellows, interns who were hired under the program, they have not received even a single payment. Imagine, none of the interns or the fellows have received even a single rupee from the government as stipend. Why? Because there is a technical problem. The disbursement of the amount has been affected because of banking and technical changes which have happened. And it has led to duplication of work. It has led to delays and backlogs in clearing the payments. Because of such an administrative issue, our researchers have not been paid for almost 13 to months. Now, you tell me, how will these researchers survive? They are adults, they can't depend on their parents, right? If not for this program, they would have worked in the private industry. They would have taken up some other job, hired a very good salary. or they would have gone abroad, studied in foreign universities. So no wonder brain drain has been a thing where we lose our cream talent, the prime talent, because nobody wants to work in such a setup where their work is not encouraged or it is not appreciated and they're not even compensated or paid for it. Right? Nobody is here to do free or charity work when it comes to scientific research. It has to be driven with right investments, with right economic incentives. Now, this Inspire program has a lot of ambition to create a human resource pool for India to arrest the brain drain and ensure that top researchers remain in public research and development in institutions like, let's say, DRDO, NAL, HAL, or CSIR. CSIR has so many research labs in the country, right? Inspire fellows and interns have been hired in under this program. They've been working, putting their hard work, but they have not been paid for it for several months. So this scheme, sponsored by Department of Science and Technology, is under the Ministry of Science and Tech, is focused on creating a human resource pool to essentially boost scientific research and development in the country. So there is an internship program where the top 1% of students right from class 10 level are given internships. Scholarship is given for higher education so that we retain the talent while allowing them to carry out their higher education. A separate fellow program where 1,000 fellowships are granted to those who are pursuing their doctorate degrees in India. So, in a way, these researchers are sacrificing better careers and better opportunities. So, if you don't pay them as promised, no matter what's the reason, there might be technical issues, there might have been an accounting problem. The problem was essentially these universities, research institutions, they had to open a zero balance account with a certain bank. But there were some technical problems. The bank has been changed with the ministry at the last minute. So they had to reopen the accounts again. Essentially, pure red tapeism, bureaucratic work had to be carried out, which was not done. So that's why these long delays. And the department is trying to justify the delay. So the researchers are angry. They are up in arms. They're tweeting about it. They're posting it on LinkedIn. Obviously, because they're running out of money. How will they lead their lives? So this is a key issue which has come up. Now let's look at the last article for today. Donald Trump has proposed the one big beautiful bill. God knows where he comes up with these names, but this one big beautiful bill can be highly problematic. Instead of being beautiful, it can be very ugly for India, for Indians in the United States, for NRIs. Why? Because one of the provision under the one big beautiful bill is to levy a tax on outward remittances. What is outward remittance? It is basically the money that Indians in the US are sending back to their families in India. It could be H1B visa holders, green card holders, those who are residing in the US, studying in the US, working in the US, right? They send back their hard earned money back home to their families, which is essentially outward remittance, essentially coming from US to India. So for us, it is inward remittance. Now, please understand, India depends heavily on remittances. Today, India is the largest recipient of remittances in the world, right? In the last 3 years, consistently, we have crossed more than $100 billion as far as inward remittances are concerned. And this makes India the top recipient of inward remittances. We overtook China in 2021-22. Since then, every year we have been receiving more than $100 billion. This shows the strength of the Indian diaspora around the world. The Indian workers, right, who are working in different countries, putting hard work and sending the money back. Now, this has become critical for the economy because the remittances are crucial to bridge the current account deficit. The trade imbalance that we have, the higher imports, that can be bridged, the current account imbalance, the deficit can be bridged using the inward bound remittances. Right? So this is crucial for stability of India's economy as well. It is critical for the interests of the Indian diaspora. Now, Donald Trump has proposed a 5% tax on these outward remittances. Basically, let's say you have a cousin, you have a family member in the US working there. If they send money from there to India, apart from the income taxes and other taxes they are paying to the US government, they will now have to pay an additional 5% tax. The bill, if it is passed, which is likely to be passed, 5% tax has been proposed. But now, following the controversy, following some opposition from the diaspora, the US has said this proposed tax is being reduced from 5% to 3.5%. From 5%, it's likely to come down to 3.5%. But still, this will impact Indians in the US because this will apply for all non citizens. If you're a non citizen in the US, whether you're a student, whether you're on H-1B visa, or you're on a tourist visa, you're on a green card, doesn't matter. Every non citizen will be liable to pay this tax. Initially, proposal was 5%, now it is 3.5%. Now, why is this such a big thing for India? Because see, USA has recently emerged as the top remittance source for India. Until recently, it was West Asia region, countries like UAE, which were at the top when it comes to remittances towards India, given the size of the Indian diaspora in the Gulf. But there has been a big shift which has happened according to RBI's report. According to the RBI, the United States emerged as the top source of remittances, accounting for nearly $32.9 billion out of the 100 plus billion dollars we have received last year. 32.9 billion, close to 33 billion, came from USA alone. Essentially, it has a share of 27.7% of the total remittances India has received. So USA has become the top contributor. So if this is taxed even at 3.5%, imagine the hit it would be on India's economy, and more importantly, on the savings of the Indian community in the US, the Indian diaspora in the US. So this is an issue which India might bring up with the US as well. On this note, I bring my discussion to an end. I hope all the topics are clear, right? We have spent enough time on each and every topic, covering the entire analysis that is required for the prelims and mains exam. So let me know what you think in the comments. And if you understood everything, do press the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That's it. Thanks for watching.